Cast your eyes across the British landscape today, and what immediately hits you? Farmed, grazed, glazed, built upon, and engineered over countless generations. From the high windswept moorlands of the north, stunning, yes, but ecologically quite stark, down to the intensively cultivated lowlands of the south, the overwhelming impression is one of human domination. Fields jostle against towns, roads carve their grey lines across rolling hills, and everywhere you look, there's evidence of human activity. But what's often conspicuously absent, certainly compared to swathes of mainland Europe and North America, is the sheer, overwhelming presence of trees. Of course, we have woodland, clinging to field boundaries or steep valley sides, the odd golf course, carefully curated parklands, and those ubiquitous conifer plantations. But vast, deep, unbroken forest? Well, you'd be hard-pressed to find it. Yes, if you want to look tidy on the nudist beaches, you shouldn't really ask for a Brazilian, but instead, a British. And that's because Britain is a landscape groomed and gardened on a grand scale, where even the quote-unquote wilder bits often owe their character more to historical land use than to untamed nature just doing its thing. So, join me where I will quickly delve into why, exactly, Britain is the shaved armpit of Europe. The year is 2006. Archaeologist Gordon Noble makes a seemingly unremarkable discovery in northwest Scotland. He initially discovers a series of slender, closely spaced post holes, typical of prehistoric timber structures in that region. As his team travels, they find charcoal fragments in this structure, predominantly hazel and birch, trees commonly used as fuel in the Neolithic, a period at the very end of the Stone Age. However, Noble finds something quite remarkable. Several of the posts show clear marks from stone axes, and their consistent diameters suggest that people harvested them from young, deliberately managed trees. This hints at what is known as coppicing, a practice where people intentionally cut trees down short so that they grow long, thin branches, perfect for making tools. Neolithic tree pollen was mixed with unexpectedly high concentrations of pollen from open or disturbed ground plants, suggesting that the posts stood not in dense forest, but in a more open, managed woodland or clearing.
Right, wait just a second there and consider the implications of this discovery. The harvesting of young trees, potentially coppice trees. Well, it might lead us to a conclusion that we don't often consider. Stone Age forestry, i.e. forestry from the Stone Age.
Okay, let's get over the crux of the argument. Britain is not a natural landscape. It certainly hasn't been since at least the early Neolithic period, 6,000 years ago. Take a peek behind the facade of national parks, wildlife trails, and the Green Party's manifesto, and you'll quickly realise that these islands are almost wholly human. Human with just a sprinkling of barely hanging on critters, many of which are invasive.
This video was inspired by these lovely comments. I want you to study them for a second. Okay, yep. Done? Yep, okay.
It's weird to hear these islands called ugly and lifeless. And as a landscape archaeologist, I know that the evidence tells a completely different story altogether. Indeed, I would instead point my finger at the people of the Neolithic and Bronze Age. That's the Stonehenge people, for any Americans watching. The idea that Britain was once an unbroken chain of dense woodlands overlooks a much longer and more interesting story.
Hello, welcome to the North York Moors once again. This is a place of extreme human activity through thousands of years. When you're up here, the feeling, well, it's just one of sheer, overwhelming desolation. Desolation on a grand scale. It was the Bronze Age people who came up here, they chopped the trees down, they burned them, and they made the soils here so acidic that, well, even to this day, you can't really find anything up here human-made except the odd waycross and marker. While this is a national park, and a place of national pride for many people. It could easily be owned by historic England. Get into the medieval period, and the life up here almost comes to a complete halt.
Long before modern industry, Britain's landscapes were a patchwork of open spaces and woodlands. During the Mesolithic period, that's over 6,000 years ago, before the Neolithic, people really began altering their environment, primarily through the use of fire. Evidence from the sites like Bonfield Gill Head indicate that the bleak, open moorland landscapes we see today were likely shaped by these early fires. By creating clearings in the woodland, they were increasing resource availability and drawing in more animals, demonstrating an early form of environmental manipulation. But it was the Neolithic period in Britain that saw the most significant transformation of the landscape. Farming was the name of the game, and trees, they weren't invited to play. The Neolithic marked a substantial decline in birch hazel woodlands that had once thrived during the preceding millennia. The biggest change in this period, of course, was that people became mostly settled and had the time to create large and elaborate stone tools, monuments, and settlements. The most striking of these tools were the polished stone axes of the period, which were seemingly spat out at an insane rate. Now, there's much to be said about the mysterious polished stone axes, as they're quite often found in or around high-status graves, and were sometimes quarried in strange places, like the Langdale Pikes in northwest England, which produced 1/3 of these tools in Britain. Using these sleek and quite frankly sexy tools alongside burning, forests at every corner of the British Isles saw at least some clearance. Moving into the Bronze Age from 2500 BC to 700 BC, the climate was both wetter and warmer, lending itself well to upland occupation. Living on hills, basically. This led to the almost annihilation of hillside woodlands throughout Britain, giving us our moorlands. Moorlands are effectively desert environments, completely barren acidic wastelands from burning and chopping down upland forests. I personally love them, and live just outside Britain's largest example, the North York Moors. However, just over the Vale of Mowbray, to the west, sits the Yorkshire Dales, which likely had very few trees to begin with, due to its limestone geology having naturally shallow soils. So, Britain was a mix of natural and human boldness. Studies around the Cannonese stone circles on the Scottish Western Islands show a direct correlation between Neolithic activity and woodland reduction, with radiocarbon-dated layers of birch branches coinciding with periods of deforestation. This is just the very marginal edge of the British Isles, and even here we can see that people were just chopping trees like bloody madmen. While Cannonese provides clear examples of Neolithic deforestation, a broader study of data from across the west of Britain has highlighted how variable woodland decline was across different islands, with some areas springing back to life before being chopped down and burned again in a bit of a flurry. This might have been done because people were moving from fertile spot to fertile spot before then reusing areas again, which they had to burn. To the east, Orkney's natural landscapes, famous for their big monuments, were quite different from any other parts of Britain. Evidence suggests that even before the Neolithic, Orkney was devoid of trees. While there may have been small pockets of woodland in Orkney, extending to around 2000 BC, in the Bronze Age, the island's northern location and harsh ocean-influenced climate prevented extensive forests from ever developing. This is likely true of much of eastern Britain, which is naturally drier and more open to the elements. Southern England did remain a predominantly dense, wooded wetland during the Stone Age. Yet, pollen analysis has shown that deforestation occurred even then. While significant deforestation is only evident from the Bronze Age onwards, giving us the landscapes we know today, pollen records reveal subtle Neolithic disturbances above a natural baseline openness of roughly 10%. Modern methods such as the Multiple Scenario Approach, or MSA, has helped us reconstruct the scale and timing of these clearances across specific periods, from around 3800 to 3400 BC and 2800 to 2600 BC. This has indicated a potential regeneration, possibly linked to activities like woodland management. As always, the south is just not as good at it as up here in Tit North. as analysis in the Lake District in the northwest of England has shown there to have been widespread deforestation as early as 3800 BC. Wow. So those bare hills I used to look at on my way to school weren't too dissimilar to how they looked in the Stone Age, except in colour, obviously. Of course, we should continue to protect, build up, and appreciate the woodlands we have here in the UK. Even if over half the tree species we have are imports from America and Asia, it is always nice to stroll around a woodland like an 18th century poet, enjoying the flowers and whatnot. But it's certainly true that understanding Britain's current landscape requires looking back at its long history of change, which began so deep back in prehistory, we don't even know what woods are natural and what were once managed. The same goes for any environmental work here in the UK. We leave it to nature, and the red squirrels all die, the newts dry up, and the birds simply get thinner. Yes, far from being a story of modern deforestation, evidence reveals a far more complex picture. Britain is beautiful because it's managed, and continued management is key. If left up to nature, at the state we've currently left it in, we'd have a lot of brambles, invasive weeds, and dastardly grey squirrels just roaming around, being just horrible. I hope you've all enjoyed this strange little video. It's sort of more of an eco thing than I usually do, but yeah, I hope you've all enjoyed it. There's been some nice footage of forests, I hope. And yeah, if you enjoyed this video, please do like and subscribe, and leave some comments down below what you think about this, because it is a really interesting topic. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. This has been Adam Morgan Ibbotson, signing out.